You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network.
Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on.
Happy Monday. This is Mondays at the Overhead Wire, sponsored by our super generous Patreon supporters. I'm Jeff Wood, your host, and joined by Han Solo. That's right. Every Wookiee's favorite right-hand man is here for the new year. Happy New Year, everybody. We're back in session in 2024, and we're really excited to be here. I hope everybody really enjoyed their holidays and the new year, and I'm looking forward to sharing everything that comes up in the next year, as we did in the last year. And, you know, as New Year's come around, it's time for some good reflection and some good food and hanging out with friends and family, and then just kind of recovering from the December that was madness. And I think the fall is generally madness as well. There's conference season and things like that take up a lot of energy and time, and then finally you get into January and you can kind of just sit down and relax and watch a little bit of football or whatever it is that you do on those cold winter days. So looking forward to coming into 2024 blazing hot. We had a show last week. I hope everybody appreciated Clayton Nall's discussion about his book on highways and partisanship that we shared, a flashback episode, as it were. It wasn't really a new show per se, but it was. I think it was a good one to share with folks because I think it kind of sets the mood for this coming 2024, which is an Olympic year, a leap year, and a presidential election year. It's going to be crazy, and I'm expecting it to be that way. So anyways, I just want to kind of glance back at that discussion we had and just think about how long ago it was, about 2018, I think, or so. That seems a long way away since we're in 2024 now. And we've come a long way, but it's, you know, some things haven't changed. Well, you know, as we usually do when we're Han Solo, we've got some great episodes coming up for you, and we wanted to share the Talking Headways podcast lineup coming up, and a couple of episodes that we had previously. And last year, or actually in the new year, I should say, not last year, but last year we did talk to Shima Hamidi, and then we released it a couple of weeks ago about her study on lane widths and safety, which was really good. We shared our live show with John King about his book on the ferry building. That was an excellent book. I wish I had more time to chat with him because there's so much stuff in there that we didn't even get to cover, which is really interesting. Next week, we'll have Beth Osborne on talking about new highway emissions monitoring rules. That'll be an interesting discussion. We had that on Thursday, so I'm looking forward to sharing that one with you all. I'm also hoping to record some really interesting shows coming up in the next month. We've got Angie Schmidt coming on, hopefully tomorrow, to record a show. Elaine Clegg, CEO of the transit agency up in Boise, is scheduled to come on as well. I also have a lot of books on my shelf. I just got a new one, actually, titled The Power of Art. And, you know, usually you don't think of art books as city books, but this is specifically the reason I requested this book is because it's basically a history of art in cities and why cities are so important to art. And I think that, you know, I love talking about that type of stuff, and hopefully you guys do too. I know that, you know, sometimes I go a little bit askew of the topic, generally cities and transportation that we cover here, but there's some really good stuff out there that I feel like is tangential and important enough to cover on the show. So hopefully we'll get that one in. It's a pretty hefty book, so I don't know exactly when I'm going to get to it, but it'll be on the show at some point, and you can say that, oh yeah, I remember when Jeff talked about that on a Monday show many, many months ago, probably. Yeah, so lots of great episodes coming up. I hope you all enjoy them. Also, we've got a happy hour coming up on Thursday, February 1st at Elixir in the Mission. We'd love for folks to come who listen to the show. I'll put a link in the show notes for more information, but it's being hosted by the Urban Environmentalist Bay Area and the folks at Streets for People. I hope to see folks out there, and I'm really looking forward to hanging out with people face-to-face, person-to-person. And the bar is outdoor parklets. Elixir is one of the oldest bars in San Francisco. They've got 2 parklets outside, but I highly recommend going into the main bar, even if just for a second, just to check it out. It is, I don't think it's the oldest, but I think it's like the second oldest or something along those lines. And it's been around since a long time, probably over 100 years. And so, looking forward to having there. We used to have Geo beers there every Thursday, and I'm looking forward to kind of going back and seeing the place that I used to hang out once a month for a number of years. So looking forward to that. Also, we're going to probably do some more of the happy hours. each month, maybe every other month or something along those lines. I'm trying to put something together to think about that, because I like seeing friends and hanging out and giving people a way to connect. And also, we're probably going to try to do some more live shows at Bay Area Metro Center. So stay tuned to this space for that information as it comes available. We're going to do some happy hours and live shows and things like that. And I'm really looking forward to this year doing more of those things and getting people kind of together. And I know it's still tough because, pandemic is still going on. There's still coronavirus out there. There's still COVID out there. And I know that I got it in October and it was not fun. It could have been much worse, I'm sure. And I try to avoid it. Indoor places is hard because I definitely wear my mask when I go to the grocery store and things like that. But I also feel like I'm getting a little bit disconnected from people by not being able to see them. So there's like a mix of feelings I have about doing, happy hours and things like that, but we'll go as we see it. We'll go as we see it. And also, as we get to when we got to the end of the year, there was a lot of people that ordered bus and bike scarves. I really did appreciate it. If you guys order, you can order actually by going to theoverheadwire.com. And if you want more than 5, we'll give you a 25% discount just for being Monday's listeners. We really appreciate you guys listening to the show here. You can email me at theoverheadwire@gmail.com for more information about that. We really do appreciate it, and we really do appreciate the support you guys show the show, you all. Even if you aren't a Patreon member, we have other ways to do it. Patreon.com/theoverheadwire. We've got scarves. We've got our bookshop site. We've got the Cars Are Cholesterol t-shirts and merch. You can subscribe to the newsletter as well at theoverheadwire.com. Top right of the site, there's a sign in where you can get the newsletter and access to the archive, which is our huge archive of links going back to 2013. We have almost 100,000 links in there now, and we're getting closer to that. And you can search them by topic, and there's also tagged by city. And we're actually working on some website improvements too to make that easier to access and get information from. So when that comes out too, I'll let you know, and we'll be chugging along. I'm looking forward to sharing all the stuff that's going on here. Also, don't forget to order any of the books that we've covered on the show on our bookshop site, bookshop.org/shop/theoverheadwire. We've got a lot of great stuff in there. The most recent one is John King's. Obviously, we'll put books in there as we cover them on the show. And then also check out the Cars Are Cholesterol t-shirts. Richard Wazinski put those together, and you can follow him at Dick David Sketches. He's always got lots of really cool stuff. He's a bike advocate up in Fort Worth in North Texas, so check that out if you get a chance. bit.ly/Cars Are Cholesterol. You can get the shirts or t-shirts or mugs or whatever you want. So as I always tell people, get the purple one. Get the purple shirt. It's really cool. Okay, this is episode 146. We're live and in session. Don't forget to put this on your podcatcher if you haven't already. I imagine you're listening to this through your podcatcher. If you're listening to the Monday show, basically you can get this show on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you find your podcasts, they're going to be there. So check it out, and thank you for following us along on here. I really appreciate it. We love all the listens that we get and all the folks that come up and say that they've listened or comment on social sites. I just got a note today on Twitter saying that somebody listened to the show and was recommended to a friend, so I really appreciate that. Also, if you're inclined, leave us a review on iTunes. We have some awesome reviews there, but it's been a few years, so we love your feedback. We love getting emails from folks. We love getting reviews and things like that. It also helps us grow the listenership, so appreciate it for everybody who's done it so far. Okay, I feel like I'm talking really fast today. I think it's because I have a lot to get through, because I didn't do a show for a little while because of the new year, and also because I hadn't done some of the Friday articles that I do for Greater Washington and Urban Milwaukee and Street Side of Man before the holidays. So we kind of missed a couple of weeks because of that. And so there's a lot to cover. There's a lot to cover from a little bit before the holidays and now. So we're going to get back into the groove, and we'll get back into our 2-week thing. I'm looking for guests too, as always, to come on the show. And I know that, one of the things that I struggle with, I think, on the show is trying to get people to come on, because it's kind of a last minute thing sometimes, whether I decided to do the show or not, whether I have time with the kiddo around the house and everything. So if we get a show and we have a guest, that means I probably planned it ahead of time. But I have been trying to get more of those folks on the show, and I really appreciate folks that reach out and say, hey, I want to come do a Monday show. A number of folks have done that in the past, and I really do appreciate that. It makes my life easier too, but also We like the solo shows too, because then I can kind of get through a little bit more news. When we have guests, we get 4 or so, 5, 6 articles maybe, and then on this one, I can get kind of load you up with news and information. Have a lot of stuff to talk about, and it's not always the most popular stuff, or it's not always the stuff that most people are talking about. But I think it's really interesting. These side stories and these other things that are out there in the media landscape, I think, are also really important. So, well, let's get to it, shall we? These are the news items that were popular in the Overhead Wire Daily. Now I think it's 18-year-old Daily Cities news list. We've been doing it since 2006. It's one of the oldest urban issue newsletters out there on these topics. Way before Substack or any of those places, we developed our own system for doing this. So sign up if you get a chance. Go to theoverheadwire.com. But yeah, let's start, shall we? Embracing manufactured housing. In the 1970s, Congress passed building code regulations for manufactured homes, which makes them cheaper and more affordable to mass produce than modular housing or custom-built homes. Some cities around the country are taking advantage of this to allow the construction of lower-cost homes for first-time homebuyers. While the stigma still remains for mobile homes, some builders are finding it possible to convince local officials and buyers that the quality has improved, which can reduce the opposition. This was by Adele Peters and Fast Company. Yeah, so there's actually a national building code for what people call mobile homes, right? They're actually not called there; they're called manufactured housing. But there's actually a national building code. So as long as the homes are up to that building code, they can be built. And so a lot of counties actually looking at affordable housing shortages or housing shortages more generally are looking into actually allowing subdivisions with manufactured housing, which is really good because it's much cheaper and it's faster to build and you can get things going really quickly. And so there's I feel like the article has a number of examples in places like North Carolina that are doing this. And yeah, so I know that there's been a lot of discussion about like modular housing or housing that comes from manufactured processes where you can kind of put everything together, whether it's cubes or whatever it is. And part of the problem is all of the codes and stuff and the restrictions that cities put up. But the manufactured housing, quote unquote, mobile homes of the past don't have this restriction. And by the way, mobile homes are actually only supposed to be used, that name is only supposed to be used for things that were built before the code. And so that was something interesting I learned from this article as well. Something you learn new every day. I highly recommend checking this article. As normal, all these items will be in the show notes, clickable links. So go check them out if you're interested in more information, because they do it way better than I do. I just kind of giving you the 30,000 foot idea. And hopefully if you're interested to go deeper, which is kind of the idea of the newsletter too. I give you kind of the top level stuff, and then you can go deep if you really want to. Okay, next up, automakers paid Tesla to make EVs. Automakers have given Tesla $8 billion while continuing to build internal combustion vehicles and falling behind on electric vehicles. This is because regulators in states like California have tried to promote zero-emissions vehicles through credit schemes. As companies were out of compliance, they purchased credits from companies like Tesla, which build zero-emission vehicles. It's a lot of money that Tony Dutzik notes many of those companies might wish they had back for EV development. This was by our friend Tony Dutzik from the Frontier Group. I found that interesting, thinking about that, like all these car companies that are actually now, competing with Tesla were paying Tesla money. I wonder if it's just because they felt like they never really thought that electric vehicles would take off or not. But $8 billion, that's a lot of money for all these companies to pay. And there's companies, and they mentioned in the article, but there's companies like, Stellantis, which owns Chrysler and Fiat and a bunch of other car manufacturing names. And, Fiat actually in California, because they had this, they built a little Fiat 500e, which the CEO was like, I don't care if we sell any, I'm just doing this for compliance, which is a dumb way to go about things. It means that you don't really care. But it's interesting that they all did that and they all paid Tesla a bunch of money. And then basically, I guess, unfortunately, Tesla is the leader in electric vehicles these days, Elon Musk's idiocy notwithstanding. But, it's interesting to see how much money they paid to people. And I think that, this actually is interesting for future ideas of cap and trade too, where, transit agencies should be able to take advantage of some of these things because they're providing lower emissions trips, because they're taking so many people on vehicles. And especially, agencies like Muni, where we have a lot of electric vehicles because of the overhead wires and because of the trolley buses and the streetcars. And it would be helpful if we created schemes where the car companies weren't necessarily paying Tesla or other vehicle manufacturers, but were paying transit agencies. I think this could be a really big way to get the money to actually bring back ridership, more service, more ridership, those types of things, as we talked about recently on the show. So I think that kind of builds into this discussion about, carbon trading, compliance schemes, credit schemes, those types of things that can support transit in the future. And we're seeing it where the car companies were basically paying Elon's Tesla $8 billion to build vehicles that they weren't doing. Okay, next up, people missing opportunities to reduce emissions. When asked what they can do to reduce emissions, people generally give answers that are good at the margins, but might not have a large impact. While the answers they give aren't unimportant, actions such as having one less car or not making long-distance flights have a bigger impact than eating organic food or changing light bulbs. It's not that people aren't smart, it's that the biggest impacts aren't intuitive, argues Matt Reynolds in Wired magazine. I found this one was a really interesting article, and somebody actually on Mastodon called this article a doomer article, and I don't think that that's actually the case. I think it's actually telling people that, yes, what you do is important, whether that's, eating certain types of food. I know that, there's a lot of discussion about vegetarianism and veganism and those types of things, but also, changing your light bulbs and trying to be more energy efficient, getting solar panels, whatever that might be. But bigger impact and bigger emissions actually come from like that international flight that you take, or that, the extra car your household has to own. So, doing the math on these things, it might not be intuitive about what makes sense. And also the system that we've set up in the United States has kind of pushed people towards the need to own cars or take flights or things like that, when, nowadays I think people are starting to think more rigorously about what they're going to do. I saw Jarrett Walker talking the other day about how now he actually thinks about, whether that flight that he might take for business is actually an important one or not. If it's just going to be one meeting that he has with people, it might be better done over Zoom. If it's a whole weekend of getting together with like people and talking through systems and stuff like that, maybe it is worth that flight because of the way, how much stuff that people get out of that, person to person impact. So I think that's interesting to think about from that perspective of what is really important when it comes to climate change. I'm not saying that we shouldn't, strive to do better on all the little things, but at the same time, there are some big things that I think people don't think is intuitive. And the reason why Matt wrote this is because, some of the surveys that people have responded to have said that they don't think that those things are as big a deal. So I think, we have these surveys and we know what people think, but there might be more education needed around what the big things are that reduce emissions. Okay, Winnipeg's potential transit turnaround. Winnipeg, the Canadian city of about 750,000 people north of Fargo, North Dakota, has seen a drop in transit ridership similar to other North American cities, but it's hoped that 2025 transit master plan approved by the city in 2021 will remedy many of the issues the transit system is facing. The master plan will improve service, modernize the network structure, and build new bus lanes downtown. This was by Dan Lett in the Free Press. Yeah, I think a lot of cities could really think about focusing on these things. And there's an item I will talk about later about Nashville, but I think it's really important that cities kind of consider, what the low-hanging fruit might be for improving transit ridership and including access. And I think in some instances, it's figuring out that where that operating money is going to come from so they can run more service and so they can have more operating hours and more vehicles available for people to get to the places they want to go. And I think, people have been really struck by how much the work from home and the pandemic have hit transit agencies, but I think there's a way to solve it. And it's, kind of moving away from the commuter only focus to thinking about what people need at all times of day. And this master plan seems like it's going to do that. And I'm looking forward to what Winnipeg comes up with. I wasn't really expecting to talk a lot about Winnipeg on a Monday show or even in the newsletter or anything in January, but there's been a number of items from Winnipeg because they're thinking about this and thinking about what they need to do. And that's including bus lanes. It's including network structure of their bus system, improving service and those types of things. So other cities can learn from this, even if it's a smaller Canadian city. I think as Jarrett also, going back to Jarrett Walker, as he says, Canadian cities have a lot to teach us here in the United States as well. Okay, next up, drivers getting more dangerous. In a deep dive for the New York Times Magazine, Matthew Scher looks at collective trauma, history, peer pressure, and current issues around traffic safety that have led to more fatalities on roads in the United States. He also looks at the role of auto companies and how their focus on making money shortchanges safety for road users, particularly with ever-increasing vehicle size and how increases in stress impact drivers. This was by Matthew Scher in the New York Times Magazine. This was a long read, and I thought it was a good one because it's not often that you start to see kind of people exploring the larger reasons for traffic violence and the deaths that are happening on our roads. 40,000 people dying every year is not normal around the world. And we're starting to take a deep dive in a number of places about why this is important. And I think it's really important to acknowledge when, there are places and journalists that take this dive and learn much more and share it with everybody. So this is really interesting, especially talking about the stress and how that impacts how people drive, the stress of the pandemic, the stress of being cooped up at home, and how that just makes people worse drivers, and it makes them more prone to snapping and more prone to driving dangerously, which is never excusable, and it's not good, but it also kind of gives an explanation behind why people were doing the things that they were doing and why so many people have died during the last couple of years because of driving, which has gone up again. It doesn't happen, like I said, it doesn't happen anywhere else around the world. It seems like the United States is a special case in this, and not in a good way. We're not special in a good way in that instance. So I recommend reading this article. It'll take you about 10, 15, 20 minutes to get through, but there's a lot of really interesting stuff in there, especially about kind of that collective trauma aspect of the pandemic. The peer pressure people feel when they're, in a change lane that he was talking about is really, it hit home for me, because I can think about that sometimes when you're on a rural road, for example. Like I'll just think about back going to 1488 in Texas, where I was going back home from the University of Texas at Austin to my house in Houston, where my parents lived. And there were many times where you had to kind of cross a road where there was no overpass or anything along those lines. And then there was a buildup of people behind you. And if you couldn't, if the traffic was oncoming and you couldn't make that turn, you felt more and more pressure to go. And so that peer pressure to make a unsafe turn, contributes to this as well. And so those little kind of instances pop up everywhere. And I think that that's really interesting. Land use reforms spur housing development. A recent analysis from the Pew Charitable Trust found that land use reforms in Minneapolis, Minnesota have increased housing stock by 12%, while seeing a 1% increase in rents between 2017 and 2022. The rest of the state has only increased housing stock by 4% and seen a 14% increase in rents. And as rents have remained stable in Minneapolis, wages have increased as well, creating even more value for renters. In the same period, homelessness dropped in the Minneapolis area by 12%, while other areas of the state saw a 14% increase. This was by Molly Bolin in Route 50, and the folks at Pew Charitable Trusts wrote this report. I think that's really interesting. We always talk about what supply and demand in housing and stuff like that, and there's a lot of folks that don't believe in that. But, if you increase the supply of housing, it looks like there's some results in Minneapolis. Unfortunately, they're having to deal with their lawsuit, the NIMBY lawsuit of folks, with the 2040 plan and all that stuff. But this is a really interesting finding that around the state, housing stock hasn't increased, but the rents have increased exponentially. And then in the city, the housing stock increased a lot, and then the rents have only increased a little bit. And I think that's really fascinating. Next up, lower speeds reduce emissions. By lowering speeds to below 30 kilometers an hour, which is about 18 miles per hour, Canadian cities can increase safety, improve mobility, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, argues Jorg Broschek. In 2022, 263 German municipalities asked the federal government to allow them to implement 30 kilometer per hour zones fully, and have shown that there are positive impacts. But it can be politically hard for auto-centric places built so much around driving to implement the changes needed. This was by Jorg Broschek in Policy Options Politiques. This is one of my favorite policy newsletters, or actually, news sites from Canada, because they always have really interesting stuff. But I think that's really fascinating. I think thinking about slower speeds and how much that might reduce emissions from people just kind of going slower, and that being a thing. I know that's something that is proven that can, lower speeds and you have lower emissions. It's the same thing about, when you have higher speeds on highways, how you have lower emissions, whether you're going 55 than if you're going 75. It's the same thing at the lower speeds as well. But also, basically it's a safety issue too. And we talked about that from the New York Times Magazine article before, that there's positive impacts from lowering speeds and people, being about 25 miles per hour or below. This one's 18 miles per hour. But I think that that's really interesting that, basically German municipalities asked the federal government, they're like, hey, can we implement these 30 kilometer per hour zones? And then the German government's like, yeah, sure, do it. And so then in the end, it's actually had really good impacts. So there's a lot of places that are giving us good ideas. And, I know that Wales is about to do their 20 kilometer per hour or 20 miles per hour zones around the country. And we'll see how that goes too. But I think we have something to learn from other places, whether that's in Asia, Africa, or even in Europe. So there's lots of really cool stuff going on around the world. And this is just another example of that. Pittsburgh's innovative approach to stormwater. The latest National Climate Assessment is lauding Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for innovative rules related to protecting residents against intense rainfall events that result from a changing climate. Large development projects with impervious surfaces are required to install green infrastructure for runoff, and the rules are some of the first to be set based on expectations of future runoff. This was by John Hurdle in the Allegheny Front. Yeah, so I know that Pennsylvania and Philadelphia has done some really cool stuff on green infrastructure for rainwater catchment and those types of things. I guess Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania overall are doing some really great work. I think it's also interesting that they're thinking about the future impacts of heavy rainfall events. As climate change gets ramped up, the weather is, the climate changes and the weather, it impacts the weather in such a way that there's way more extreme events. So like here in San Francisco last year, I know I've talked about this on the show before, but we got 5 inches of rain in one day, which flooded the basement a little bit in the house. And, you never would expect that. But basically, you're going to see these types of events over and over again. And so if you're actually designing for them, you can actually, respond to them, which is what Pittsburgh has done. And I hope other cities follow suit. Okay, so those were the main items, the most popular items. These are the bonus items, the ones that I wrote about in my newsletter, but also didn't have, they didn't get a lot of clicks, but that's okay. That means that there's more room to share information about them in the Monday show. But there's a number of items here that I wanted to share with folks because I think they're really interesting, and I think they forward the discussion about transportation in cities. Okay, first up, Greyhound bus stops are disappearing all over the country after the company's properties have been purchased by hedge funds. The valuable properties, usually in downtowns and popular commercial areas, have left the transportation space, impacting inner city bus operations and access while enriching a few vulture capitalists such as Alden Capital, known for buying and gutting nationally renowned newspapers. This was in CNN by Nathaniel Meyerson. So basically, Greyhound sold off its properties, and now all these places in central cities don't have bus stops anymore, and so people are having to wait on the side of a street. There's no bathrooms for waiting people. It bothers the businesses and the landowners proximate to the places where the buses are picking up. It seems to me that there should be some sort of a solution from a public policy standpoint where cities take up the mantle, or maybe the cities should have actually purchased the bus stops and made them into something big, because there's still inner city bus lines and there's still a lot of people that take them and still a lot of uses for them. But the land that they're on was so valuable that Greyhound kind of vulture capitaled it and got rid of those to sell them off and make money for the company. And they sold off the Greyhound lines too to somebody as well. But this is something it's something that's just kind of like there's a bad taste in my mouth. I don't know what it is, but I do know what it is. It's the global capital kind of strip mining things that were good before, and I think that's something that bothers me. New research out of Princeton suggests that renters burdened by unaffordable housing and high costs are more likely to die earlier in life. A person paying 50% of income or on rent has 9% chance of dying sooner than someone paying 30%. This was in CNBC. I mean, it makes sense. You're stressed, you're rent burdened. It's going to be a stressor on your body and maybe, lead to an earlier death because of complications from other things. I've been talking about this a lot lately, but Dr. Mindy Fullalove's Root Shock really kind of discusses that when you're stressed, when you are pushed out of a place, when you are worried about getting pushed out of a place, your health might decline as well. And this is kind of an example of that from the research. In 1945, towards the end of the modernist movement, Egyptian architect Hassan Fathi began a social housing experiment using local materials and vernacular, supporting passive cooling through earth, water, and wind. What he displayed was an architecture that can keep people cool in the heat, even without modern infrastructure. This was by the Washington Post. Yeah, so local vernaculars actually have a big impact on, cooling and heating. And I think that we've made a huge mistake actually by building houses the same way everywhere, because in a place like Phoenix versus a place like San Francisco, they're very different well, the housing there are different, but I'm just saying like suburbs everywhere seem to be, different, but they can be heated or cooled based on the design. And local vernacular was designed over thousands of years to figure that out, has kind of been thrown by the wayside. And now we're dependent on air conditioners and other energy intensive ways of cooling and heating. And so there's something to be learned there from, I feel like, the Egyptian experience and what Hassan Fathi was able to do during that time of modernism when he was kind of going against the grain of what was happening at the time. Medellin, Colombia has reduced the city's average temperature 2 degrees C by creating green corridors in the city. The green corridors, which cost just over $16 million to plant and $600,000 per year to maintain, also clean the air. This was in the European sting. Yeah, more green corridors. Let's do it. America's electric vehicle transition isn't going as planned, but perhaps not for the reasons people might think. Aside from a slow start on charging infrastructure, the plan is ultimately flawed because we see electric vehicles as a one-to-one replacement for existing gas-powered cars. Since cars are getting larger, their EV replacements are heavier, more expensive, meaning it's a tough sell for the average user, while incentives and tax breaks have unintended consequences. This was in Business Insider by Paris Marx, who was on the show talking about stuff, and his podcast Tech Won't Save Us talks about this stuff a lot. But I think that I think he's right. I think the cars are so expensive now that nobody's gonna buy a $40,000-$50,000 electric car if they can buy a $20,000 or $30,000 regular gas powered car. It's just not economically feasible for a lot of folks. And so all these cars are heavier. They're going to cost more. The batteries are going to cost more to replace. They're going to require more mining. Really what we should be doing is figuring out a way to have smaller vehicles. I mean, you can still have a little, hatchback car, and it can do a lot of the same things that a larger vehicle SUV might be able to do. I mean, there's a little bit more space for if you want to go on a large road trip, but I think that one large road trip isn't necessarily something that, if you do road trips all the time, that's another thing. But if you're doing it once every 5 years or something, it doesn't really make a lot of sense from that perspective. And so if you're living in a city too, there's an opportunity to get a smaller car. And, I've noticed that over time that, in cities like San Francisco, I see a lot more like Volkswagen Golfs or, Bugs, Volkswagen Beetles, or, Honda Fits I've noticed lately a lot more for reasons. And so, there's just a lot of smaller vehicles in cities, and I think that's because they make more sense in that less space. Sometimes cars don't make sense in cities at all, but for, you have a huge truck with, quad axles and whatever else, that doesn't necessarily fit in a city at all. And I think that the Volkswagen Golf is going to do a lot more good than the huge truck. So it makes sense that everything is getting more expensive, and it's getting harder to get people to go to EVs if there's no vehicle that's available for them. After a string of mayors and failed transit plans, Nashville Mayor Freddie O'Connell hopes residents will vote for a long-range vision in November. But instead of big-ticket items, he says the focus should be on steady improvements. I would agree with this. I think that that's really important to think about, some of the bus line improvements. I mean, that's the thing is like after doing this and talking about it and blogging about it for 20 years, and I love light rail, I love streetcars, I love the idea of riding rails and those types of things. But at the same time, we know so much about what makes people ride transit, and it's more service. And so, if you're a smaller city you have a dream of something bigger, you can start smaller and start building your ridership now by doing the little things. And I hope that Mayor Freddie O'Connell does this in Nashville, because the last thing they had with light rail and tunnels and bus rapid transit, downtown light rail tunnel and things like that is, that was kind of a tough sell, and that went down in smoke. It was partly because the mayor had a scandal and some other stuff happened, but there's a lot of folks that were using automated vehicles and autonomous vehicles against them, saying they're coming soon, which we know that they're not. Which is kind of funny. It's like the same thing. Hyperloop 1 died recently, and Elon was saying, this is the future, so kill high-speed rail, and then it never came around, and the whole idea was to kill high-speed rail, according to his biographer. So there's like a lot of that going on, and I feel like if you do the simple things, if you do the easier things, it might be a little bit harder to sell because there's no big ticket item for people to get excited about necessarily. It's like ribbon cuttings, but they're going to make a big change and a big deal. And then you can, tout the numbers. I remember when Charlotte passed their election, and there was a light rail on the ticket. They built their light rail line, but they also increased their bus service 100% and increased ridership a ton. And so there's something good to come out of that as well. Okay, a few more here. A study of taxes on sugary drinks in a number of cities found that the price of drinks went up while purchases went down, reducing the amount of people consumed. Sugar-sweetened beverages have a huge health impact, making up a quarter of added sugar in American diets, which is why many of the taxes were enacted. This was an NPR. A Bay Area legislator has proposed combining the 27 transit agencies that operate within the MTC's footprint in Northern California. The idea has come and gone a few times, but there's urgency to discuss potential solutions for the pandemic-induced ridership drop. This was in the San Francisco Chronicle. I think this died, actually, and the reason why I actually put this in here is because I think it's an interesting discussion to have. I don't know if combining the 27 transit agencies is the right way to go. Combining all of them together, I think there's sub-area equity and stuff that I know that Sound Transit and other, folks have had to deal with in terms of how you dole out money and that type of thing from a geographic perspective. But I also think that there's probably something to be said about some efficiencies that could be had by, figuring out a way to make the transit agencies maybe more friendly to each other in terms of, transfers and those types of things. I don't know exactly how it would look like, but I think we should have a conversation. I don't think a bill saying you have to do this is the right way to go, but there's also there's space for a discussion, and there's space for having that move forward in some form or fashion. Not necessarily a bill, but let's get that discussion started and going, because I think it's one we need to have. Atlanta City Council voted to put $1 million into a fund for e-bike rebates that would be worth up to $2,000 per person depending on eligibility. 75% of the funding is reserved for buyers making 80% or below regional median income. This was by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And researchers are finding thousands of nanoplastics present in water that comes from single-use water bottles. Those nanoplastics are so small they can be absorbed into cells and even pass through the brain-blood barrier. This was in the Los Angeles Times. I read this and I was wondering how much the plastic bottles have, led to cancer and things like that. We're seeing lots of more instances of cancer. We're seeing lots more instances of health problems and things. And I'm wondering how much that has to do with plastic bottles, where the nanoplastics are just getting into our bodies. And even there's fertility issues and stuff like that. I can't imagine that nanoplastic particles are good for anything, especially human health. It's something that I actually tried not to do. Every once in a while you'll probably have to have a bottle of bottled water, but drinking from the tap is my favorite thing. Partly because San Francisco water is really good, but also because I feel like it feels plastic bottles reusable as this always has felt funny to me for some reason, and I'm not sure why. But I guess we're finding out now that's not really good for you. Can actually cause problems. Walmart has announced it will begin drone deliveries in Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. The aerial delivery vehicles will be able to cover 75% of residents in a 30-minute delivery window, and 75% of Walmart's inventory is the size and weight requirements that would be available for drone deliveries. This was in Transport Topics. I'm seeing the traffic patterns now above in the skies coming, where the drones are just delivering people and goods and all that stuff, and we become three-dimensional. We'll see that if that actually happens, but we're here, I guess, in Dallas-Fort Worth. We'll see where it goes. I don't know how to feel about that, but I'm sure we'll discuss it more in the future as it comes up. And finally, in San Diego, a pilot program will match low-income seniors with homeowners who have an extra bedroom in their residence. Older adults will need to earn less than 120% of area median income, and there will be limits on how much they can be charged in rent. This was by Fox 5 San Diego. Yeah, there's all this idea about sharing places, and if you have an extra room, and they should make it easier to rent to people who might have income or might have trouble finding housing, can't find their own home. That might be the way to go if people want to. There's no need to force anybody, but if people have an extra couple bedrooms and they can sort it out with folks that they're interested in maybe low-income seniors that might actually need a place to live instead of being homeless, I think that there's something to be said about that. It's cool. I like the matching system, and we'll see how it goes. It's a pilot program, so I'm sure they'll give us some results after it's finished. Okay, well, this week and every week I want to thank our generous Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome and keep the show going by listening and supporting each month. We wouldn't be here without you, so thank you very much. And you can support the show by going to patreon.com/theredwire. We've had people sign up each month during the pandemic, and we're super appreciative of that. $2 a month gets you some stickers and a handwritten note. $10 a month will get you one of our transportation scarves. Super, super awesome. Thanks everybody for supporting and listening and all that stuff. And, I was thinking, should we have, a chat room or something? Should we have a Discord for for Mondays or for Talking Headways more generally. It's something that I'm on Discord channels for Star Wars chats and stuff like that, but I haven't really used it very much. I'm wondering if that's something people are interested in. If so, let me know, and maybe we can set one up and have a chat room for folks to listen to the show and want to talk about some of the topics. I'd love to have that. But now that Twitter is dying, I'm still using Twitter, but it's still dying. It feels a little bit emptier there. It might be good to have these new places where people can kind of get together and chat about the stuff that we're talking about. So if that's interesting to people, let me know, and maybe we'll set something up. Puppies and Butterflies. This is part of the show where we talk about something fun, interesting, or maybe it just didn't fit in other sections. I hope everybody's having a great new year. We've had some really exciting stuff come up, including our February 1st happy hour at Elixir, which I talked about earlier in the show. It'll be at near Missions and 16th and Mission BART. And so it's up, I think, at Guerrero. I think it's at Guerrero and 16th Street. So folks can walk really quickly a couple blocks from the BART station if they want to come from somewhere else in the area. But yeah, I'm looking forward to having some live shows and happy hours and things like that. But this is just making me happy to maybe see people more often. I feel like I went to go somewhere recently and I saw people and I was like, wow, people, it's amazing. Oh, it was John King. It was the live show, and I was really excited to get to chat with people again and hang out. So yeah, I want to do that more often this year. I know that people can still give you nasty diseases and stuff, and that's no fun, but I think that there's something about human about being connected to other people even in person, and so we can try to lower the risk as much as possible, but get together again if we can. Yeah, so we're really excited to have some of those happy hours and things where people can get together. I hope to see some of you folks there. I'm really excited to be face-to-face, as I said, and looking forward to that. So stay tuned for more of those, and we'll have our February 1st happy hour at Elixir. Looking forward to that. And so, yeah, you can find me on Twitter at The Overhead Wire. It's dying, but I'm still there. TheOverheadWire.com. If you are interested in seeing what we're up to, or if you want to sign up for the newsletter, you can find me on Mastodon at The Overhead Wire at sfba.social. You can find me on Threads at The Overhead Wire. You can find me on Instagram if you like if you want to look at some of my vacation photos and things like that. I don't post a ton of stuff on there, but I do, check it out. And also on I'll post some of the podcast stuff there from time to time too. If that's the only social media that you use, then it'll be there. So if you want to follow me on any of those sites, feel free to chat about the show anywhere you feel fit. We're on LinkedIn as well, so come find us there too. And thanks so much for joining us at Mondays at the Overhead Wire. Thanks to our generous Patreons for sponsoring this week and every week's podcast. We'll see you next time.
Talking